Well, that didn't work. Okay, due to recent events, there are new people here. Welcome back to the returning viewers, or welcome if this is your first time here. I'm Abby, and this is what I actually do on YouTube. This is Vinyl Monday, the who, what, when, where, why, and how do I feel about classic albums in this here collection. I'm also a sucker for dressing for a theme. I collect mostly pop and rock from the 1960s and 70s, that's what I talk about mainly, but I do branch out. I make frequent stops in folk, prog, funk, soul, jazz, and the Frank Zappa extended universe. Great googly moogly. But if deep dives aren't your thing, I also do Vinyl Monday in 60 seconds here on my channel, over on my Instagram, as well as TikTok. So if any of the above things are of interest to you, stick around. We're a pretty chill bunch of people, man. I also have a podcast with my friend Emma. It's called The Dolls Podcast, and it's all about unsung lady heroes from the 60s and 70s. Our very first season finale went live on Friday. I wrote this episode about the legendary artist groupie and beloved Chicagoan Ms. Cynthia Plastercaster. When Emma asked me to host this show with her, I immediately knew who I wanted to write an episode for. I also had the utmost pleasure of interviewing the Plastercaster documentary director of photography, Jeff Economy, for this episode. Thank you all so much for an amazing season. You do not want to miss this episode. It's linked in my description. Alright, now that I'm through with introducing myself and what I actually do, onto this week's episode. It has been a long time since this group was last featured. I think it's over a year ago now. This was one of the first 5 album reviews I ever posted. It was Satanic Majesties, Kick Out the Jams, Piper, Are You Experienced, and this. This week's album is... I forgot the sleeve. Well, it would help if you actually had the album with you, AD. This week's album is... Led Zeppelin III. Congrats if you guessed this one. If you want to play along, all you gotta do is check out my community tab. That's where I post hints to next week's episode, make announcements, I host polls. You can find all of that on my channel. And if you so choose, you can always read the written versions of my reviews on my website, linked in the description. Alright, let's take the plastic off. So my copy is an original. It's got the infamous Aleister Crowley inscription on the dead wax. Do what thou wilt on side 1, and so mote it be on side 2. So during Zeppelin III sessions, Jimmy Page bought a house in Scotland that was once owned by Crowley. Here's what he had to say about the inscription in Brad Tolinski's book, Light and Shade. Quote, I sort of wondered how long it was gonna take before anybody noticed. It took a long while. No wonder they started playing our records backwards after that. And that's really all he lets on. Jimmy Page was super into the occult in the 70s. Astrology, Aleister Crowley, God knows what else. There's a lot we could say about this man's private life, so moving on. In Zeppelin's original contract with Atlantic Records, Jimmy Page and their manager Peter Grant negotiated, quote, complete artistic control. Recording, marketing, song lengths, and yes, packaging. For a few albums there, Zeppelin came up with increasingly unserious ideas to test just how far this complete artistic control thing could go. The first of those unserious ideas was the Zeppelin III cover, designed by Zacron. You'd think he was French, or at the very least an eccentric, vaguely European millionaire, but no. He was just some bloke named Richard who Jimmy knew from art school. The original concept was inspired by, quote, the old-fashioned data wheels used for home guides to gardening, mathematics, and first aid treatment. Kinda like the star wheel. Turn it to any date and time and you'll see what constellations are in the sky. I used to have one of these. I don't know what became of it. If I can find it in the meantime, you'll see it here. If you turned any band member's face to the main hole, photos and symbols related to them were supposed to appear in the other holes. But this plan went sideways when Zacron disappeared with the art for several months. The guys couldn't get a hold of him, kind of a problem when you're on a deadline. Finally, Jimmy had to say, look man, done or not, we need to have this thing. Jimmy actually didn't like the Zeppelin III art. He thought it, quote, teeny bopperish. But it was too late. The deadline was here. This is what they had to go with. A colorful pop art adjacent collage with all sorts of images related to flight. Birds, dragonflies, butterflies, angels, balloons, even a winged chair. The spinning wheel, or Volvel, is cool as shit. Lots of different little nuggets. See Robert Plant mid-sneeze. My wheel isn't attached to the jacket, so I can actually pull it out and show you. Not gonna lie, I'm kinda mad that so much of this design effectively goes to waste. The gatefold is a little sparse in comparison, but still cool to look at. And the back cover is a composite photo of all the guys. I can't think of any other album's packaging quite like Zeppelin III. There's die-cut sleeves like physical graffiti. There's circular album covers like the original Ogden's Nut Gone Flake? Ogden's? It's one of the two. But this is next level. It's a little cutesy for Zeppelin, but Zakran thought outside the box. This is one of the better gimmick covers out there. On Led Zeppelin III, we have Robert Plant on lead vocals, Jimmy Page on guitar, steel guitar, banjo, and dulcimer, John Paul Jones on bass, mandolin, Hammond organ, and Moog synthesizer, and John Bonham on drums. Led Zeppelin III was produced by Jimmy Page, engineered by Andy Johns and Terry Manning. Roll transition. Once Atlantic checked their bank accounts after their debut, they immediately ordered their follow-up, Led Zeppelin II. Once again, the guys just wipe the floor with their competition sales-wise. They've just completed their 5th tour of the United States, their stronghold audience. They can't get enough. Zeppelin's performance fees have gone way up from $1,500. I found a headline saying they made $37,000 in one night. That's $300,000 in today's money. Other sources said depending on the gig, they made as much as $100,000 a night. $812,000 in today's money. Jesus! Considering just how busy they were, it's kind of a miracle they got Zeppelin II done in the first place. They played over 200 gigs in a year and a half. It took like 5 different studios and Eddie Kramer chasing the guys around with the tapes in a suitcase to record it. They were in the States so much, there were rumors they were staying. While here in the great US of A, they observed some pretty stark cultural differences. John Bonham told a story to Record Mirror about an old guy who gave them shit for having long hair. They gave it right back to him. Then he turned up to their gig with a shotgun. Bonzo said, quote, "There's gonna be a real revolution over there with the kids and an army against their parents. They just don't understand one another at all. You either find them totally for you or totally against you. Never an in-between." Meanwhile, back in Europe, Eva von Zeppelin, claiming to be either the second cousin, granddaughter, or grandniece of Ferdinand von Zeppelin. I still haven't been able to find an exact translation. Danish folk, please let me know. She objects to Led Zeppelin supposedly using her name. Quote, "Let this be a warning that these people who claim to be musicians had better not use the name Zeppelin and play their trashy music in Denmark. If they do, I will see them in court." Yeah. Okay, lady. As the story goes, the guys tried to reason with her, even inviting her to lunch at the studio. And things were actually going pretty well. You know, until she saw the first album. The Led Zeppelin. Jimmy said, quote, "I had to run and hide. She just blew her top." This whole Von Zeppelin thing made it far enough in court that for exactly one gig in Copenhagen on February 21st, 1970, Led Zeppelin changed their name to The Knobs. Cheeky. To get away from it all, in the spring of 1970, Robert Plant suggests he and Jimmy take a long weekend. They book the, I'm gonna try my very best to mimic his pronunciation, Bronnerar cottage in the Welsh countryside. It's literally the most remote place he could possibly think of. There's no power or running water, but it had sentimental value for Planty. He visited as a kid. The guys grow out their facial hair, pack up their wool sweaters, and off they went. They didn't mean to start up working again, it just kinda happened. Quote, "When Robert and I went to Bronnerar, it wasn't like it was, let's go down to Wales and write. But being in the countryside set a tone. These guys are musicians. They don't go anywhere without at least an acoustic guitar in tow. They didn't sit down specifically to write folk rock either. The band, Fairport Convention, CSN, and the Birds before them were all around and doing quite well for themselves at the time. That much is true." And Bert Jansch comes up a lot when people discuss this album. For Zeppelin, it was more so a natural extension of the acoustic elements they always had. The first two songs they had for the record were Immigrant Song and Friends, the former inspired by Norse mythology, the latter inspired an argument Jimmy had with his girlfriend. Oh yeah, that's a pretty big development. Roger Daltrey of The Who introduced Jimmy Page to French model Charlotte Martin. You know, Eric Clapton's ex, and the woman George Harrison allegedly cheated on Pattie Boyd with. Why are British musicians so incestuous? It's weird. Anyway, those two songs really set the tone for what was to come. Since I've Been Lovin' You is around too. That's the Way was written at Bronnerar, as was a Zeppelin arrangement of Knowing That I'm Losing You. Measuring a summer's day. Retitled Tangerine. I only find it slips away to gray. Of course, folk and the blues were still the fabric of this material. Out on the Tiles started as a drinking song, but Plant took it in a totally different direction. Leadbelly's arrangement of Gallows Pole dictated Zeppelin's. Of course, Leadbelly wasn't credited. That song crops up later in Zeppelin's discography. It became Custard Pie. JPJ and Bonzo joined the party a little later on to rehearse this material at a location very important to Zeppelin lore, Headley Grange. Now, in Brad Talinsky's book, Jimmy says that Zeppelin III was recorded in the spring of 1970 at Olympic and Island Studios in London. He neglected to mention, or maybe forgot, who knows, that Zeppelin borrowed the Rolling Stones mobile to use at Headley Grange. This was, of course, the Stones' mobile unit that came in great handy when they fled England for tax reasons. The thing about all these heavy groups in the late 60s and early 70s, Cream, Hendrix, Zeppelin, was that technology hadn't quite caught up to what they were doing yet. This was the case for Since I've Been Loving You. It was intended for Zeppelin II, but it was a bitch to record. Two previous attempts to capture it failed, and we still have a blemished version on the album. It was mixed under the supervision of Terry Manning at Ardent Studios in Memphis, Tennessee on Zeppelin's 6th tour of the United States. These guys never took a break for long. The track listing of Led Zeppelin III goes as follows. Opening up side 1, we have Immigrant Song, followed by Friends, then Celebration Day, next Since I've Been Loving You, and side 1 closes with Out on the Tiles. Opening up side 2, we have Gallows Pole, followed by Tangerine. Next, That's the Way, then Bronnerar Stomp? There's not the R there, so it's kind of throwing me off. And the album closes with Hats Off to Roy Harper. Led Zeppelin III was released in October of 1970, amidst one of the most active summers and falls in all of rock and roll history. Black Sabbath broke the States with Paranoid, the Grateful Dead were on a hot streak with Workingman's Dead and American Beauty. Released just 4 months apart, mind you. Santana were basking in their post-Woodstock glory with Abraxas. Speaking of Woodstock stars, in September of 1970, 1970, Jimi Hendrix died. A generational titan. I'm pretty sure the world stopped turning that day. Zeppelin were literally asked about Jimmy's death at the press conference for this very album.
Tragedy, yeah, tragedy.
What's your reaction to the fact that he died from an overdose of drugs, reportedly?
Well, that's what makes it hard to comprehend that the whole thing happened.
Why?
Well, it's just such a shock when the statement is made like that.
CSN and Sometimes Why had one of the most pre-ordered albums of the whole year. The hype for Zeppelin III was amazing as well. Between these two, Atlantic was just rolling in money. Just one single was released. Immigrant Song, backed with Hey Hey What Can I Do. This is not the sleeve mine came in. Mine is actually hanging in a frame over there. It's the Japanese version of the single. It was released in a number of other territories, including the States, but notably not in the UK. Remember, Atlantic agreed to Zeppelin having complete artistic control. They didn't have to put out singles in their home market if they didn't want to. Nor did they really have to. While audiences took to Zeppelin like ducks to water, it took critics some time. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that critics hated Led Zeppelin simply for being Led Zeppelin. That's why the band didn't put their name on the next two albums. Lester Bangs happened to write Rolling Stone's review of Zeppelin III and admitted his bias outright. Quote, "I keep nursing this love-hate attitude towards Led Zeppelin, partly from genuine interest and mostly indefensible hopes, in part from the conviction that nobody that crass could be all that bad. I turn to each fresh album expecting what? But the guy isn't completely infallible. No critic is. In a term that made me chuckle, he describes a complete and utter loudness that snuffs out any chance for nuance. Quote, "I've never made a Zepp show, but friends, most of them the type, admittedly, who will listen to anything so long as it's loud and they're destroyed, describe a thunderous, near undifferentiated tidal wave of sound that doesn't engross but envelops to snuff any possible distraction. My buddy, my guy, you're a known Stooges fan! The call is coming from inside the house!" Though Les writes off Since I've Been Loving You as, quote, "the obligatory, slow, and lethally dull 7-minute blues jam," he hails Immigrant Song and recognizes how genuinely gorgeous That's the Way is. It's odd that he doesn't even mention Tangerine considering, but never mind. And of course, he deals a backhanded compliment to the recording fidelity. Though not his best work, I'm singling out Les's take on Zeppelin III because, in some ways, he got the Led Zeppelin entity right. He acknowledged that, for better or worse, Led Zeppelin was the 1970s. They're gonna author how the 70s goes for rock and roll. And he was right. They did. Quote, "It doesn't challenge anybody's intelligence or sensibilities, relying instead on a pat visceral impact that will ensure absolute stardom for many moons to come." Oh, you have no idea how many moons. Why did this critic to audience dissonance happen? Part of it was the hype, no doubt, but I saw a Reddit comment of all things recently that reframed my perspective. Quote, "Lester Bangs, along with Ben Fong Torres,
Crazy.
and other Rolling Stone writers of the early 1970s epitomized the type of writer who wanted rock and roll to be important. Kind of in the same way that writers would treat the great jazz musicians of the 1950s. In trying to legitimize music that was largely looked down upon as crass, lowbrow, or kid stuff in these guys' adolescence, they sought stuff that meant something, like Critical Darling and Critical Punching Bag Bob Dylan. In their pursuit of establishing legitimacy, these critics adopted the very attitude they sought to destroy. It's the cycle of rock criticism, baby! God. Now, how did Zeppelin feel about this pushback? Reading Light and Shade, I was struck by the fuck you attitude these guys operated with. When asked about the initial critical response of Zeppelin III, Jimmy said, quote, "We were so far ahead that it was very difficult to reviewers to know what the hell we were doing. Very rarely could they get the plot of what's going on. Audacious as it seems, Jimmy has a point. The massive hype surrounding this band clouded a lot of critics' capacity to properly review their stuff. Even the greats were prone to reviewing the hype. Like other Zeppelin releases, pop culture has soaked 3 right up. See Immigrant Song in School of Rock. That's the Way and Tangerine in Almost Famous.
Leave me behind! I'm only the fucking lead singer!
Immigrant Song, of course, in Thor Ragnarok. Immigrant Song again in fucking Shrek the Third. I still can't believe the sheer amount of Zeppelin Cameron Crowe got for Almost Famous, but Shrek the Third is arguably more impressive. Let's duke this out in the comments. A handful of songs from Zeppelin III sessions did not make it onto the final record, including a recording of Key to the Highway. Poor Tom wound up on Coda, and the gorgeous Bronnerar instrumental slapped onto Physical Graffiti. I cannot wait to redux this for its 50th anniversary. My thoughts have changed so much. But Zeppelin III is remembered today as kind of the unloved middle sibling of 2 and... not unlike Houses of the Holy is seen as the unloved middle sibling of 4 and Physical Graffiti. So, what do I think this time around about Zeppelin III? Going in, it had been a long time since I sat down and listened to a Led Zeppelin album in full, due in part to the nature of this. It's months or even years until I circle back to any artist or group, and due in part to the peak of my Zeppelin phase being half a decade behind me at this point. Aside from a few select songs like 10 Years Gone, The Rain Song, and the like, I don't find myself listening to Zeppelin the way I used to. I will say this now, it was very smart for Zeppelin to move away from blues rock and towards folk rock with this release. They played it fast and loose with song credits on 1 and 2. I'm not as lenient with that as I once was. But still, it's been fun to revisit 3 this week. It transports me back to a time where I lived and died by the first 4 Zeppelin albums and had just as many Zeppelin t-shirts on rotation. And this was my first Zeppelin album. Kind of an odd place to start with this. Houses of the Holy and Physical Graffiti. It's no wonder I shunned this at first in favor of 1 and 2. Last week, I pointed out something that all great albums should have. A really solid 3 to 4 song run to start things off. The White Album has Back in the USSR, Dear Prudence, and Glass Onion. Deja Vu has Carry On, Teach Your Children, Almost Cut My Hair, and Helpless. American Beauty has Box of Rain, Friend of the Devil, Sugar Magnolia, and Operator. Ladies and gentlemen, Zeppelin III has a 4-song run. Let's start with the utterly indisputable Immigrant Song. Immigrant Song is, in a lot of ways, Led Zeppelin's mission statement. Lyrics mentioning European mythology and or fantasy literature, an unshakable rhythm section, a deceptively simple riff, listen to that modified block mystery chord Jimmy throws in, and Robert Plant just being Robert Plant. I would never know the chorus was, "On we sweep with threshing ore, our only goal will be the western shore," unless I sought it out. This is a hitting notes over singing words situation, and I don't blame the guy. Robert Plant was at the top of his game in 1970 and 71. Before this, he could be shrill, and after this, he could sound thin. This is Goldilocks' Goldilocks song, and the shriek of the bloodthirsty conqueror that only sounded better live. You can't stop this thing, and it's the little things that count, like the sweeping reverb coming into the verses and the tape hisses. Immigrant Song is so special for highlighting JPJ's unique place in the band. I think of Led Zeppelin as a cup game, swapping each individual part and seeing where the ball turns up. Through the verses, the bass links up with the guitar and drums playing the same straight thing. It's like a beast locking its jaw and twisting its head. But through the chorus, Man, this song structure is odd. JPJ frees himself playing those ascending lines. It raises up the whole song to fall back on the central motif. For all of the above reasons, opening 3 with Immigrant Song is the perfect bait and switch. One of this album's most potent choices is Immigrant Song and Friends back to back. The yin and yang of this record, if you will. Immigrant Song, the trademark electric Zeppelin thing, loosely inspired by Link Wray's Rumble, and Friends, the Middle Eastern Indian-inspired tune with a drone underneath. India-inspired sounds were in Zeppelin's DNA, but this one seems different. This style suits Jimmy and the wacky chords he favored in this time. JPJ's string arrangement is sophistication we haven't seen yet from this band. It makes this song at this point stick out like a broken bone. We won't hear them do something quite like this again until In the Light. All these elements together make a song about how necessary human connection is feel unsettling. Plant howling at the end doesn't make it comforting either. I think that's why other fans aren't crazy about Friends and why I am so crazy about it. Wonky tape stuff and studio chatter pops up a lot through this album. It's very casual and uncharacteristic of showy Led Zeppelin. I think of Friends and Celebration Day as weird, unsettling sisters. Friends is pretty weird. Celebration Day stares into your windows at night. Celebration Day is fucking weird, but I love it. It never settles into anything. There is no home base. The bass and guitar swing back and forth constantly to the point of motion sickness. Jimmy's solo is forced into this motion. It's an odd chord change to make. It has an effect of undue or premature celebration amidst a time of trouble. That's frighteningly relevant right now. A better word would be oscillation. That's what we hear at the end of Friends and beginning of Celebration Day, this synth line that curves like a snake. The lyrics are pretty cryptic, unusually so for a band that loved dirty double entendres and oohs and babies, typical of the blues tradition. She hears them talk of new ways to protect the home she lives in, then wonders what it's all about when they break down the door. Her name is brown or white or black, you know her very well. You hear her cries of mercy as the winners toll the bell. Later, heading for your destination, but the price you pay to nowhere has increased $1 more. I can't tell you exactly what this means because I don't know, but I can tell you whatever it is, it's dark and paranoid. The optimism of the happy hippie 60s is so gone. Rounding out this stack of 4 songs is one of the best in Zeppelin's entire discography, second only to Achilles' Last Stand, Since I've Been Loving You. After such an assertive first 3 tracks, Immigrant Song is bossy, Friends is exotic, Celebration Day is jarring. Since I've Been Loving You is striking for how intimate it starts. The room must have been quite small. Jimmy's amp is rattling Bonzo's kick drum. Usually you'd put blankets in the bottom to prevent that, but something tells me Bonzo wasn't a fan of that. Speaking of the bass drum, apparently there's a squeaky pedal on this recording that nobody caught until it was too late, but I can't hear it. Can you? We have talked ad nauseum about Bonzo's drumming on Since I've Been Loving You. It's his greatest moment. The way he slightly drags the rhythm before Jimmy's frenetic entrance is addicting. It's never not thrilling. But I can tell you why it's great. It's light for him, but heavy for any other drummer. It's another Goldilocks moment. The host of the Big Fat 5 podcast, highly recommend to any drum nerds in the audience, said any other guy might have done the super spacey Nick Mason thing here. But Bonzo thuds along, even in the soft moments of Since I've Been Loving You. It gives it its spine and establishes its mood, making you laugh with dread. I've mentioned the symbiotic relationship between Planty and Roger Daltrey before on this series. Robert Plant could sing Won't Get Fooled Again, but Roger Daltrey could not sing Since I've Been Loving You. Both had the vocal chops, don't get me wrong, but Rog was more theatrical. That's why he rocked Tommy. Somehow, there's something more grounded about Plant's voice. He covers a whole spectrum of emotion in this song. Snark when he mutters,
I don't think that's right.
suspicion, accusation, hopeless bargaining, 'cause I love you, baby, how I love you, darling, how I love you, baby, my beloved little girl, and this anguished cry that comes right from the soul. top to bottom, this song sounds like being blindsided. I don't know how many of you viewers have been cheated on, but this song builds from the gut feeling to the realization this guitar line is hung in suspension, feels like putting all the pieces together in your head and everything makes sense now, and oh god, you don't want it to be true, but it is. God, this song is lightning in a bottle. It's searing. Lester Bangs called Celebration Day and Out on the Tiles, quote, production line Zepp churners that no fan could fault and no one else could even hear without an effort. That's an odd way to describe something as a deep cut, but okay, Les. While I disagree with the former, Celebration Day suits the first side quite nicely, I regret to inform you that my feelings on Out on the Tiles have changed since my original review. It's a good rocker, good riff, good feel, upbeat, but compared to the other 4 songs occupying this side of the record, it's just okay. Out on the Tiles has big expectations to fill. Since I've Been Loving You is a tough act to follow, and it doesn't quite get there. Side 2 opens with lukewarm, folksy gallows pole. I believe this is the first time we hear mandolin on a Zeppelin record, unless I'm missing something from 1 or 2. I won't spend much time on this song, there are better folk-inspired cuts on this thing, but it's a fitting ode to Zeppelin III's traditional American and English roots. What do you love about music?
To
begin with, everything. Talk about a needle drop. Tangerine, tangerine, you are utterly beguiling. It always had beautiful bones. See, knowing that I'm losing you. But the Yardbirds arrangement would be too done up for what this album seeks to do and for where this group excelled. Jimmy's revised lyrics are a much better fit as well. Knowing that I'm losing you is quite wordy. There's space between the lines with tangerine, tangerine, living reflection of a dream. I was her love, she was my queen, and now 1,000 years between. It's like he's fallen hopelessly in love with a woman from another time. And knowing what Jimmy's current girlfriend looks like, I wouldn't put time travel past him. I love that the false start was left in. It's appropriately relaxed and decidedly undone. Listen to the soft whisper count in before the prettiest 12 string. It's got almost a medieval twinge to it. There are many light, airy elements, the steel guitar and dulcimer that Jerry Garcia and Joni Mitchell respectively slingshot into rock and roll. Layering of glittery 12-string guitar, JPJ playing a sparse, impressionistic part, and Bonzo favoring the cymbal. And oh my god, this harmony vocal! Where did it come from? It's stunning! Since I've Been Loving You is hailed as the best guitar solo on 3, I disagree. Like the lyrics of Longing for Lost Love, the solo does just enough on Tangerine. It's deliberate, all about note choice, which is unusual for Jimmy's famously sloppy technique. Another very potent sequencing choice occupies this side of the record, with That's the Way following Tangerine. I haven't seen many others comment on this, but a lot of this album is about bargaining and longing. Bargaining with and grieving an unfaithful lover, yearning for lost love, the apparent male yearning to be a Viking. That's the Way mourns innocence. A little boy's mother tells him he can't play with his friend anymore. He's from the darker side of town, though they're next door neighbors. It sounds like this kid is a hippie and our narrator comes from a straight family. This friend lets his hair hang down, sheds tears over fishes lying in dirty water dying, and kisses tiny flowers. 1969 was a rough year for the hippies, a year the movement ultimately couldn't survive. After the Tate LaBianca murders, the general public turned their back on the hippies. They cut their hair and got big boy jobs, or were sent to war. I imagine they mourn what could have been, just as we are now. This is the prettiest guitar part. I agree with the creative decision for Bonzo to sit in on Tangerine and sit That's the Way out. This is a strings-heavy song. He puts the rock on paper, but That's the Way sees to set the pages free to fly. And I love the reverse acoustic guitar under the mandolin. It's sort of this back and forth motion, sort of peeling away. Stomp is playful, but otherwise forgettable. I routinely forget it follows That's the Way. Might it be a predecessor to Stomp Clap Hey Rock? And then there's Hats Off to Roy Harper. The bottleneck slide on crack. And such a fuck you album closer, considering Hats Off, the guys fuck you, man. You guys just don't get it. This attitude made more sense. It's the most authentic Delta blues sounding thing they ever did, but it's an anemic homage. And it's still the worst Led Zeppelin song. A little over a year before this album was released, Jimmy Page said to Melody Maker, quote, "I can't see this group ever getting stale because new ideas are coming up all the time. The new album is so different from the first, and the next one will probably be just as different again." Zeppelin III was a daring album. It's not so much a sonic pivot as it is an elaboration upon things that were already there. The acoustic sound, a nod to the East. Their lyricism has improved leaps and bounds. They're tackling more mature topics than ever. Zeppelin haven't lost their edge, but rather added a new dimension to it. This growth is remarkable considering how green the band still was. They'd been together for, what, all of 2 years at this point, but with every stretch, there are shortcomings. Growing means growing pains. It happened again on Houses of the Holy, coming in between 4 and Physical Graffiti. Robert Plant had to get used to his new voice. Here, these guys had to find their footing in a new decade. Of course, they tried things that didn't work. I feel their focus wavered through side 2, and it does blemish the quality of the overall record. It's a mixed bag, bearing some of Zeppelin's most beautiful songs and ugliest sounds. But this was a necessary evolution to make for Zeppelin to secure their place in the 1970s, the decade they would go on to dominate. It's a grounded sound, but an audacious record. These guys could cradle a mandolin as soon as they liken themselves to gods. You know what they say, in order to achieve something, you must first visualize yourself doing it. It's the law of manifestation, right? This album is a unique manifestation with grit, polish, brawn, and beauty. I maintain my point that Led Zeppelin III is steeply underrated. My personal favorites off this album are Friends, Celebration Day, Since I've Been Loving You, Tangerine, and That's the Way. Remember, if you want to keep up with all of my favorites from all of the Vinyl Mondays, I have a Spotify playlist linked in my description. I update it every week. And that's it! That is the Led Zeppelin Redux. What do you think of this album? What do you think of Led Zeppelin? Leave a comment letting me know. I love hearing what you guys have to say about albums that I love. And remember, despite what some guy on the internet says, your opinion matters. If you like what I do here, you should like this video and subscribe to my channel. I post new episodes of Vinyl Monday every Monday morning at 11, and our fun little Q&A session of the Dolls Pod is coming soon. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week, and since we seem to be growing at an unprecedented rate, 50,000 subscribers, and I will review Trout Mask Replica. Bye! Don't make that happen too soon.